Yeah, and I was listening to one of your interviews and it made a lot of sense. So I have my BA in psychology. I don't remember most of it. I feel like I learned way more after university than I did while I was in university. But you were saying how like when you get in fights with your wife over these silly things that you'll kind of just go wah 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 wah, and you'll just kind of
Yeah.
pick on each other and acknowledge that it's silly. And then in psychology and especially in a lot of counseling, they're like, no, every emotion is valid and important and let's magnify that. And I was like, yeah, that is kind of what I mean, anytime I've been to counseling, that's what they say. It's almost like they're trying to create a victim out of you and create this outrage in you. And so, well, that's not going to help relationships at all. Like, you have to acknowledge when you're being ridiculous and you're just succumbing to your human biology and vice versa, right? So, it's not to say if you do something that's actually bad, ignore that. But it's saying if you get mad at your husband because he doesn't take out the trash, like maybe don't blow up and have like a week long fight over it. Acknowledge that that's just something silly. Um, I guess is that intentional with the teaching methods? Is like are you creating customers essentially if you have all of these people that are rattled when they leave? Well, I guess what's the purpose of that?
Yeah, it's so I've been in psychology departments where we train a lot of clinical psychology PhD students who go on to become clinical psychologists and marital therapists and couples therapists and have can have a lot of power in people's lives.
Yeah.
I wish I wish we trained those clinical psychologists more often to understand that a lot of the conflicts that come up aren't really about the things that the people think they're about, right?
Right.
We
Mhm.
know for example, one of the major predictors of marital arguments is one or both people are hungry and they're
Oh,
just grumpy.
really?
They're grumpy because they're hungry. And when you're hungry, like you end up picking fights over trivia.
Mhm.
And the solution to that is not necessarily to go to couples therapy and spend an hour talking about the trivia that your brain convinced you is the reason you fought.
Mhm.
The solution might be maybe change your diet a little bit so you don't have the sugar spikes and crashes, and you have more of a healthy diet that gives like sustained energy. And maybe that could reduce your frustration. Or I also think a lot of people become more emotionally sensitive if they're um, like not exercising and not staying in shape. And
Mhm.
maybe they have a kind of embodied frustration that like I haven't done any, like I haven't walked even 1,000 steps today. I haven't lifted anything heavy. And
Mhm.
so there's a kind of restlessness
Mhm.
that comes with a sedentary lifestyle that often gets taken out on a spouse or a
Mhm.
boyfriend or girlfriend. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, your typical clinical psychologist will be like, that's not my issue. Like health, exercise, lifestyle, sunshine, like they'll kind of touch on it, but they won't really see it as like the first thing to fix. And often it's the most important thing to fix.
I couldn't agree more. And now you're not allowed to criticize anyone's diet habits or their lack of movement, or I guess like their physical neglect, because then that just makes you shallow and superficial. But I mean, I can tell any of my listeners 100% if I don't do at least like some yoga or some movement or like a long walk with the dogs, I'm a different person. If I don't get enough sunlight, it's like you're a house plant. You have to kind of treat yourself like a house plant. Are you getting
Yeah.
enough sun? Are you hydrated? Is your environment clean? Like these are all super important things and we just fail to recognize them. But I mean, sugar is absolutely a drug. So if you're just eating all of this processed garbage, you're not in like a homeostatic state ever. Like you're constantly on a drug and we don't want to call it that because then that makes us feel gross. But I think we have to take some responsibility for how we treat our bodies because that's going to affect how we show up in our lives to everyone else that we interact with.
Yeah, and I've been to a few paleo lifestyle conferences, like Paleo FX is a conference that happened in
Hmm.
Austin, Texas. I went to some of those. And, one thing that's striking about the paleo conferences is like everybody's in incredible shape and super sexy and hot. And like you look at the guys and you're like, I want to be like that guy. And the women like, ooh, so good. And they But they also seem very emotionally resilient. And when you talk to them about their relationships, you get the sense that like there's a lot of stuff that would annoy your ordinary sedentary people that just don't annoy these these paleo people. They're like, if I'm going to CrossFit 5 times a week and you know doing these incredibly challenging physical things and like suffering and really working through difficulty, by contrast to that, sorting out little marital arguments is pretty easy.
Mhm.
Whereas I think for a lot of people, the marital arguments are like the most challenging thing in their life. And so it feels like really burdensome because they're not really actually testing their self control or their stoicism in any other domain.
No, because it does take a lot of willpower to be in shape, right? It's so easy to overindulge or to say that you're exhausted and you just want to watch Netflix. That's the super easy route. But if you don't test any of your mental endurance or resilience and especially your physical, then again, when these things show up in your life, you're not gonna float. That's 100%. You're gonna sink. Um,
And of course, the other big benefit to, taking care of your body is people will tend to have more sex in a relationship if they're in shape. Their sex hormone levels will be better regulated and they'll like feel more energetic. And if their partner's in shape, they'll be more attracted to them. And we know from marriage researchers like John Gottman that a really good index of how good a marriage is you just take like the number of times per month that you have sex and you subtract the number of times per month you have an argument, right? And that's pretty much how good the marriage feels to both
oh
people. So
wow.
so like often you don't really need to reduce the number of arguments, you just need to increase the amount of sex, which is like a major way that you kind of resolve arguments
Mhm.
or
Yeah,
prevent them.